It's mid-September. I'm on one of my favourite stretches of one of my favourite rivers, the River Wye. I'm fishing a swim where I know there are both chub and barbel. It's a depression where food naturally collects and therefore fish gather. In the first programme you'll have seen me adding to that by ground baiting with pellets for the chub and some more substantial balls of ground bait for the barbel. It's all about the feeding with this type of fishing. There's no wild panic about getting the rod out, not until the ground bait has had plenty of time to do its job. I fished a couple of hours for the chub in the upper layers of the water first, as in my experience they're more likely to get feeding before being bullied out of the way by the barbel. So now it's time to concentrate on those wily Wye barbel, whose attention I hope I've kept with regular servings of accurately placed ground bait.
Let me take a moment to explain to you the difference in barbel rods. Most these days have got two tops. You've got the solid top and you've got the quiver tip top. The butt, that's pretty well standard, so we won't bother to talk about that. We use the solid top for whenever we're fishing, if you like, carp fishing style for barbel, as in we're using boilies or pellets and we're putting them on a hair rig. So we want the fish to hook itself. So everything wants to be very solid. If we're going to put the bait on the hook, so we want to see the bites, that's when we use the quiver tip. Never bother to use a quiver tip when you're hair rigging a bait. You're getting two different methods confused and muddled into each other. Now I'm going to fish the hair rig. I'm going to try and get the fish to bolt against a big feeder. This one's 56 grams. I haven't got a clue what that is in ounces. I'm not very metrically minded, but it's a lot. That's pretty heavy. And once that's full of ground bait, that's very heavy. That's going to sit on the bottom. I'm going to run a hook link off of this with a little hair rig boilie on it.
Attached to 8-pound mainline will be 75 centimetres of lead core, which will keep everything tight down on the bottom so the fish don't detect it. Also, this offers protection from the rough, rocky river bottom, which can be murderous on monofilament line. To make life easy, I'm using a ready-made lead core heli rig, which, if you haven't seen one before, comes with a spliced loop at one end to which you attach the main line. On the other end, you have a couple of buffer beads and a swivel to which you attach your hook link, forming what is known as a helicopter rig. Basically, this is because it allows the hook length to swing around like a helicopter blade, and the feeder is clipped on just beneath that. The hook length, like my main line, is going to be 8-pound breaking strain and is about 60 centimetres long, which is a bit longer than I would use normally for carp or chub. I'm using a size 10 hook with a 14mm KG1 boilie on a hair rig. And again, make the hair a little longer than you would for chub or carp. And that is pretty much it.
Well, I've got myself down here nice and comfortable. I needed chair. Barbel fishing is likely to take a little longer than chub fishing. Now we fill the feeder up. You quite simply just push it into this lovely mix we made earlier on. Squeeze it in with your fingers so it gets in there fairly tight. And that will now stay in there for the duration of the cast. I prefer using a feeder like this to a method feeder because I get exactly the same amount in it every time. So again, like when I was saying when I casting out, throwing out my balls of ground bait, I can hit the same spot time and time and time again. And it's back to that first cast of the day. Don't pull it up too tight. People tend to wind the tip right down into it a little bit too tight sometimes. I like to have a little bit of a loop in the line going back up to that feeder, and hopefully I'll be able to show you why when we start to get some bites. Right, put fish on. So now our problem is to stop the fish from going downstream. But as you can see, the line is now starting to go up the river. A sure sign we've hooked ourselves a barbel. And again, keeping that rod up. Don't let that rod go down flat. The arrogance of this barbel, it's not a particularly big barbel, but it's our first fish of the day. And he's having the cheek to try and take me upriver. Slip down to the edge of the river. He goes back upriver again. And again, as I say, quite a small fish, but very welcome for our first fish of the day. One barbel. One barbel, one terrier. Well, there, our first barbel of the day. Not the biggest barbel in the Wye. Rather like our chub, we'll work our way up in sizes. Very neatly hooked in the corner of the mouth there. But look what a beautiful shape barbel are. You can see how they can survive in such a powerful river. That lovely shape where they sit and hug down on the bottom. Look, if I turn him and face him onto you, all those fins all stand out. They'll stick out from his body where he pins himself down on the bottom. And Cassie loves barbel. For some reason, they obviously taste better than chub. So he insists on having a little lick of them, and then we let them go. One of the things you probably noticed, and I'm not sure I pointed it out, was because I've gone from the centre pin over to the fixed spool. A couple of reasons really. Even I would struggle to cast a feeder that far off of a centre pin reel. But also, these modern little fixed spools with the baitrunner are so good for this style of fishing. You've got a clutch on the front which you adjust, which literally, so when the fish is surging, instead of the line breaking, the clutch gives. But also you've got this baitrunner facility at the back here, this little lever here. Now when I put that on, the whole thing goes into a sort of free spool motion. Because some of these barbel tapes can be so savage that literally, if you're not paying attention to your rod, you lose it. It will just upend and go. So that can often save your rod. Now I've got another tape now, there we are. And as soon as I strike into it, I close the baitrunner and I'm into a good fish this time. This is taking the line off very nicely. If you keep the bait going in, the bigger fish will slowly but surely muscle their way up the swim and push the smaller ones out of the way. He's on that trick again, you see, working his way up the river. Staying down nice and deep, this one. He's fortunately gone past that weed bed. Now, if that had been a chub, he'd have dived straight in that weed bed, but not Mr. Barbel. Far too cocky. I'm going to ease myself down to that water's edge again, get myself down low. The dog's getting ambitious. That's a nicer fish. And there's a classic Wye barbel. Beautiful big fish, perfect colour, perfect condition. And just lower him into the water. Just gently hold his tail for a moment. They'll let us know when he's ready to go. Don't tell your dad I'm here. I guess if there's one thing that preoccupies barbel fishers' minds, is bait. And it's great to see how much that's changed since the 60s when I started, when everybody was on maggots. It started off with a few pints of maggots, it got onto a few gallons of maggots, and invariably they were fished under a float. You trotted. And a huge number of barbel were caught back in those days. After we had the maggots, the next thing that came along was the luncheon meat. Now, I've always been convinced that barbel don't actually care for luncheon meat very much, but it happened to be there and it was easy to eat, so they kind of put up with it, because they never went really mad on it. Probably the next thing that followed on from that was from the carp fishing, was the sweet corn, the great sweet corn revolution. And barbel still, to this day, love sweet corn. And one of the lovely things about sweet corn is it's a terribly visual bait, that bright yellow. You can put lots and lots of it in, it doesn't cost you much. And equally, the fish can eat lots and lots of it without filling themselves up. And that's always an interesting thing to bear in mind as well, because after the sweet corn revolution, you've had the big pellet revolution, which is still going on and is still very successful. But the one drawback, I think, with the pellets, with they say the halibut pellets and so on, is if you put too many in, they fill the fish up very quickly, as opposed to the old sweet corn, which they could eat all day. And then the sort of follow-on, obviously, again from the whole carp fishing world, was the boilie. I love boilies. I have to say they're such a convenient thing to use. They don't get out of the tin in the car and turn into blue bottles for a start, do they? You know, boilies just, if you don't use them on Wednesday, well, you carry on and use them on Saturday. Maggots was such a pain in the what's it. So I love it. And interestingly, I found there's quite a lot of aspects to the boilie side of it. Water temperature is probably the biggest one. Some of the nicest things to use on, so nicest as far as the barbel are concerned, are some of the oily things again, some of the fish mealy things. But of course, they're not actually much use when you've got really cold water. A lot of those things, Salmon Supreme is a fabulous barbel bait. It was a fabulous carp bait. And we found, using it for carp, that in the summer when the water was really warm, it worked brilliantly, because the oil in it would come out into the water, into warm water. Whereas because once the water got colder and colder, it wouldn't. So then it was fruit baits that started to work terribly well. And I asked the guy who supplies my bait, Bob Baker, well, what do you reckon? And he said, you know, Plum Royale is one of the best barbel baits. I thought, where the hell does plum come from in a barbel's world? What would fruit have to do with barbel? But listen, the guy's been producing bait for 25 years. So I went down to Kennet and tried it. And do you know, it took 20 minutes for a barbel to eat a Plum Royale boilie. There's no way they'd ever seen one in their life before. They obviously have this amazing ability to decide what's edible and what's not. But without any question at all, over all those years, those barbel have gone on and on and on, trying new and newer things, and it actually seems that most of them work better and better and better. And now here we are with our pellets and our boilies and our flavours that work in the summer and our flavours that work in the winter. Life's never been so good. Now, as you probably noticed, I've put my barbel bait down below that willow, and I've put my pellets from my chub above that willow. And I purposely tried to keep them separately. If I just put the pellet in for the chub up there and kept going, I doubt if 50% of it was even getting to the bottom, the chub were grabbing it on the way down. But that was getting to the bottom would have slowly drawn the barbel up. But then what happens is the barbel tend to get aggressive and actually kick the chub out of the way. And you get a little bit of a lull, and you can catch a few chub, and it all goes quiet and you wonder why. And it's often, now that was a fish has just lifted my feeder and dropped it back again. Is he going to stay on there? No, he's let it settle again. Well, that fish just picked it up and dropped it again, but as I was trying to explain, they actually live in a slightly different spot of the swim by nature. The barbel love to live on this upward slope at the bottom of the depression, feeding along the bottom. The chub will be right at the front end of the depression, taking anything that's often floating in on that surface water even, which is why I caught them so high up in the water compared with the barbel. But interestingly, if I just put the pellet in at the top of the swim, a certain amount of it would get down past those chub and get to the bottom, and then the barbel would detect it, would smell it, and start to move up the swim. And then you often get a lull in your chub fishing. And you think, well, what have I done wrong? Have I got my feed pattern wrong? Am I fishing the wrong depth? But it's not. It's the barbel have come up under those chub and bullied them out of the way. They're actually quite aggressive once they move on to a food source. And then the barbel start to take your bait. And the chub, goodness knows, they just clear off out of it, stay well out of the way. So it's lovely. You've got a sort of pecking order of fish, even in a small little, 50 yards of a river like this. There's a definite pecking order. Well, you sit here and you watch the rod tip, wondering what is actually happening out there. I'm sure that's where most fishermen's mind wanders to. And if you're in any doubt about it, well, why don't you put your rig in some shallow water somewhere and watch it for yourself? And you watched what I made up as my bait. There's little pellets in there, there's some method mix to bind it all together, and then there's some bag and stick mix it's called, which is actually all that pellet but in a powder base, so that it goes into a cloud in the water. So when my feeder lands out there in the water, within a few moments, because it's mixed very, very dry, it's only just got enough water to hold it together to get it out there. And then it will immediately absorb more water, almost explode out of that feeder into a cloud, and will deposit all the little pellets that are in it along the bottom. And obviously depending on the flow, but the amount of flow we've got here, I've probably got a little stream of bait from my feeder for about a foot down below it, and then of course 6 inches below that sits my boilie. So you can picture that trap in your mind. And I'm sure that the more you work out what happens with things like that, the more confidently you sit here and do it, because it's that simple. I'm sat here today, I've got 8-pound line straight through, as I explained to you all, which is about the minimum you can get away with here. And I'm only getting away with that because I've got that lead core leader on the end, which is the bit that's taking the stick from the rocks. Otherwise you'd need more, but it's a point that's so often brought up as how heavy should the tackle be, should you scale it down when the weather gets colder? It's not really as straightforward as that, because for instance at the moment the river's very low and very clear. So you'll have to use relatively light fishing tackle to fool the fish. In a week's time it may rain and the water will come up 6 inches and colour a bit, and then none of it matters at all. You could be fishing 15-pound line straight through without any effort at all. But one thing I'll always point out to you is really always bear in mind the safety of the fish. Don't go so fine just to get takes that you know full well once you hook a fish is going to make it into the snags or whatever. That simply isn't fair, and that simply isn't sporting. So we've got this whole expanse of river here, and what you're trying to do, as I've explained already, the fish are here by nature. They're here by the fact that the river's low, there's a nice level spot over there that's very comfortable for them, and there's all the weed coming down stream, the broken bits of weed from where the swans are feeding with the bits of food on. You've got all that, but now when you're supplementing that food, you're trying to concentrate the fish into as tighter and tighter area as you can. So you keep on feeding them, you get that competitiveness. They're sitting in a row, one after another, coming up to take those pieces of bait. That's when you start to make a catch like this, when you can repeatedly keep going. But it's no good if my feeder lands 20 feet from where I've been putting it every other time, because then suddenly all my little group of fish that are sat here, going to enjoy themselves, suddenly go, oh, no, it's over there. And then of course the next cast goes 20 feet over here. So they all go, oh no, it's not over there anymore, it's over here now. So you get my message. Just practice if necessary. Watch people, watch some of the match anglers. Do you know, Ian Heaps will show you, he'll roll up 5 balls of ground bait and throw all of them into a bucket, and every one will land in the bucket. That's how accurate those guys are, that's how good they are, and that's how good you need to be if you want to put something like this together. That casting that accuracy with that feeder on the same spot every time is crucial. He's grating his teeth. Can't quite see in there, but down inside there's a set of teeth, quite powerful. If I put my finger right down there to somewhere about underneath my thumb here, all these cyprinids, the carp family, barbel, carp, roach, have all got teeth, but they're way back in their throat rather than in their mouth, which is why they take their food, throw it back into their throat and then crush it. The moral in the story is, don't put your finger down a barbel's mouth. Well, as you can see, my river's a fairly big river. You may not fish quite such a large river and wonder what you've picked up from me here can apply to your small river. It's actually quite different in many ways. Those three simple rules will still apply. Find the fish, get them feeding, take your time. The last thing to do is actually put the tackle in the water. But the difference in the habits of fishing little rivers is quite considerable. These pools I'm fishing are considerable size, isn't it? Some of these are probably 2, 3, 4 acres just in one pool, whereas you may be fishing a little tiny thing that's 20 foot square. And clearly a huge barbel is not going to find enough food in a tiny little pool like that. In my experience, fishing smaller rivers roam tremendously, and the bigger the fish, the more it will roam. And quite often when you think you've found a barbel in a small river, in fact all you've done is found his living room. You haven't found his dining room. You'll probably find the moment that dusk approaches, he's no longer in the living room. He's wandered off to his several dining rooms in spots further up the river. So my advice would be to do exactly the same as we've done here. Go look for fish, go locate, and then look for spots above there where he's likely to stop and feed, those lovely little slack spots, but those nice smooth flow, not that curly stuff. And put some bait in, 2, 3, 4 of those above where you've seen that fish, and as the dusk approaches, start fishing your way up those spots and try and intercept him at one of those spots, because that's what he'll do. I've known big fish in small rivers roam as much as half a mile up the river. By midnight, drop back to where they started and then start to do the whole thing all over again. It's a quite different ball game to these huge pools here, which hold enough food for fish to sit in constantly. There's the most perfect barbel on the most perfect day from the most perfect river. I reckon that's about 10.5 pounds. When you can think these fish grow, I've had them 12 pounds plus in here. Nationally they grow quite a bit bigger than that. Can you imagine what a really big one looks like?